Hey guys, I'm Nassim,
And I'm Spencer.
and I figured it would be a good idea to do this video because we've been writing articles for so many years on Photography Live, and many of you haven't associated the writer with the face. No.
And we have some pretty good faces.
What's the best way to put this? Okay, I figured it would be a good idea to do this video just so that our readers can get to know us a little bit better, because we've been writing these articles on Photography Live for so many years, and many people just don't associate our real faces in real life with the content that we have on Photography Live. So I think it would be a good idea to do a little bit of an intro. I'll talk about myself. Spencer will talk about his background and how we both got into photography and what we've been doing at Photography Live, hopefully. Yep. All right, so how about you get started? Talk about your background and what got you into photography.
Okay. Well, I started in photography with the Nikon D50-100. I think that I was a freshman in high school, probably, 14 years old, roughly? And I'm
14
22
years
now.
old, wow.
Yeah. So I've been shooting for about 8 years at this point, which, I don't know. By percentage of my life, I guess that's a lot.
Cool. Well, where are you from, though?
Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was born and raised near Nashville.
All right.
And so there's some landscape photography to do in Tennessee. Obviously, they've got the Smoky Mountains, but Nashville's 3 or 4 hours away from that. So I didn't really do a lot of landscapes at first, which is why I did a lot of macro in my
What
backyard.
amazes me is just listening to someone say, I got interest in something when I was 14 years old. I'm trying to remember my youth, and all I remember was, okay, so I collected post stamps, right?
Okay.
Postal stamps. I
did that
collected
too.
coins. What else did I do? I did some stuff like that, but it was back when I was maybe 10 years old.
Okay.
At 14, I was trying to figure out what I'm gonna do at high school, right? And so for me, trying to understand how someone gets into photography when they're 14 years old, there had to be something. What was it that made you want to do photography? There had to be something.
I've always had a weird obsession with something at any point in my life. When I was in elementary school and middle school, it was origami, like folding paper.
Oh.
I don't know if you've seen any of the origamis that I've done, but I still have some of them in a bag somewhere.
That's cool.
And
you showed me some.
Yeah, right. It's the type of thing where, like a lot of hobbies, you can just get more and more into it. And by the end, I was special ordering books from Japan that were written in Japanese, and so you could only decipher what folds you needed to do to the paper based on the images and so on.
I always had this impression that the young people of America today, right, when you're 12, 14, 16 years old, you're mostly just playing with things, playing games, doing those kind of things.
There was that too.
Did you play games too?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah?
Yep. But
But
the origami
it didn't
was
interest
just,
you.
I mean, in the long run, you got to do something in your free time. And when I was able to hang out with my friends, then I would. But a lot of times they would have homework or I would have homework. And so, when I had a little bit of free time, I would just do origami.
You got bored out of origami?
Yeah, at a certain point, literally, I had bought the top book that you could buy in terms of, how difficult the origami models were. And the limiting factor was that the paper that I was using was not big enough, and I couldn't buy paper in the U.S. that was big enough.
Right.
And so I decided
you
to
have
move
to
on
get
to a
those
different
rolls
hobby.
or something?
Yeah, they sell like rolled rice paper basically that you would have to cut yourself and stuff like that.
So you figured then you're just gonna get into photography?
I mean, it wasn't like straightforward like I am done with origami, now I'm going to start doing photography. But it was very gradual in that direction. Yeah.
Okay.
I got the camera, the D50-100, and I enjoyed taking pictures with it, so I just used my free time to do more of that.
Okay, cool. So you end up with a camera, with a kit lens.
Yep.
And then eventually, is that how you bought your macro lens as well?
I ended up using the kit lens to do macro photography at first, but it wasn't quite close enough, so I wanted to end up using something that was actually a macro lens. And at the time, I was either looking at the older version of the Nikon 100 or 105 and then the newer version of the 105. Decided on the newer one, and that really is when I started learning photography, because macro just takes a whole lot more.
And that macro lens also landed you an award.
Yeah, that was
Right?
much later, but yeah, when I was 17
Was
or
that the
18.
105 shot?
That's
that you
correct,
used?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I shot a photo of a lizard with dew droplets right at sunrise in Florida. And I submitted it to a competition, and it won for the youth category, and they displayed it in the
At the Smithsonian, right?
which is, yeah, one of the weirder experiences of my life. But
That's
it was kind of
awesome.
fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets to do that.
No,
So that's.
yeah.
I remember that day when you sent me that information,
That's true,
and I
yeah.
actually posted that on Photography Life.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
posted as a news thing that
kinda
your
fun.
photo is now hanging in the Smithsonian Museum and people could go and see it. Mm-hmm. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, yep. And they actually, the competition that does that has stopped displaying at the Smithsonian, and it wouldn't really matter anyway, because now that I can't enter the youth competition, it would be harder to win. But
All right.
it aligned right, and it
Now,
ended up working.
now, before we get into the conversation about you and me meeting and
Yeah.
getting into Photography Life, I'll just jump into my background a little bit if you
Yeah,
don't mind,
absolutely.
unless you want to share something else.
That's about it for me.
All right. So I'm originally from a country called Uzbekistan, and when somebody asks me where is Uzbekistan, because not many people know, it's part of the former Soviet republics, one of the 15. And if you actually, I always say, if the easiest way to pinpoint the location on the map for me, especially for those who are in Colorado, because
Yeah.
this is where I ended up in the United States when I came in 1997.
Yeah.
If you dig a hole in here in Colorado,
Okay.
you'll come out of Uzbekistan. It's
Okay.
literally on the other side of the planet. So, but geographically, after the Afghan war, now I can say, okay, we're above Afghanistan, and most people know where Afghanistan is. And then I ended up in 1997 I ended up in the United States as part of the presidential scholarship program.
Yep.
And I was chosen as one of the few, I guess, back then to come and study in the United States. And I had to go back and serve for a couple of years. And then after doing that, I came back to the United States in 2002. So
Okay.
kind of started my career here in the United States, I guess. I kind of went into the area, into the industry that I thought was the most relevant for me,
Yeah.
which was information technology.
Sure.
So, which was odd because I actually went to University of Colorado at Boulder studying management and marketing.
Oh.
But then I decided, you can't really be a manager.
So then, how did you know like coding and stuff like that?
Well, it was always my side hobby.
Okay.
So
Oh.
for me, it was, and that's an interesting story, right? Because initially growing up, I remember the very first time when I came across a computer. And back then, there were people doing coding, the basic coding. And there, I don't know if anyone from our audience remembers, but there was a language called Pascal.
Okay.
There was a language called BASIC, and there was even a version called Turbo Basic, Turbo Pascal. So eventually my dad bought me a computer, and then
Okay.
that's how I started getting into a lot of the intricate details of MS-DOS,
Nice,
which was the
nice.
very first operating system
Sure.
I came across, and then Windows, the very first Windows that came out. So that's kind of how I've always had the side hobby, but growing up in the Soviet Union, you couldn't really build a career at the time out of information technology. So I figured, you know what, I'm just going to do something that is popular, which was, either you're going to be going into
Sure,
finance
yeah.
or a business school and do something in a business school.
Makes sense.
So I got into business school, and that's how I graduated with management and marketing degree, double majored here in University of Colorado Boulder. But the interesting thing afterwards was that, we'll get into photography, but for the majority of my life was spent in information technology. That's what I did basically from 2002 all the way until I quit my job in information technology from the corporate world and started doing this full time, which is photography. So for me, that looking at the camera, that's one of the things that fascinated me about the camera. The very first time
sure.
I encountered
Yeah.
it was the technology.
And same here, basically. Origami and photography are different, but they both involve a lot of math combined with art. And
Exactly,
and the other hobby that I had back at that age was just writing, which is why I've enjoyed writing for Photography Life so much.
Right.
But it's the same kind of thing. There's rules, but then there's also creativity to it.
Yeah. So yeah, after spending almost 20 years in information technology, I figured, you know what? I just started getting tired of working for someone. I think I wanted a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
And for me, the reason why I really enjoyed photography, the very first time I remember taking the camera and I was photographing, I can't remember, maybe it was Rocky Mountain National Park,
Okay.
where I was by myself with my camera with no one else.
Right.
And that silence, right? That moment where I'm looking at this beautiful nature and I'm by myself. Something happened inside me.
Yeah.
And that alone kind of made me want to do this more. So then I started doing wildlife photography, going out, taking pictures, and this was all happening parallel to me working in a corporate environment.
Right.
So for a lot of people, photography is a hobby in a similar way. It's a way to get out. It's a way to spend a little bit more time doing something different, right? So for me, that was kind of the thing. So, but what really got me into it was writing, which was interesting because the very first time I picked up the camera, which was a Nikon D80, which then I upgraded to Nikon D90, I started looking into the camera and I'm like, this thing is so complicated.
Yeah.
There's so many buttons. There's so many features. There's all this different terminology that you have to understand.
For sure.
For a lot of people who don't know any of it, before then I used to own a Canon PowerShot point-and-shoot camera. It was this tiny thing. And I remember it was basic because you turn the camera on and you squeeze the shutter release and you've got a picture, right? But then I got a D90 or a D80, the very first camera that I owned, and I realized there's so much stuff to learn. So I figured, what I'm going to do? I'm just going to write something for myself because being in IT, and I don't know if any of our readers are either formerly in IT or currently in IT, whenever you produce any sort of software or you do something more complicated, implement new hardware or whatever, you have to write a manual.
Right. Right.
Because
then the next guy looks at it and he has no idea what you wrote.
If you build something, right, and nobody knows what you built, how are you going to be able to troubleshoot and fix things when things happen? So for me, having my first camera in my hands, I figured what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put together some information, which is going to be super basic, super easy for me to remember. And I remember I fired up WinWord, Microsoft Word, and then I started just writing, okay, what is ISO in basic terminology? How do I understand it so I don't forget? Because I knew initially I didn't really have much interest, right? So I knew if I'm going to leave the camera for a month and then come back to it, how am I going to remember what those things mean? So I wrote this very simple manual, right, for myself, shutter speed, aperture, ISO.
Okay.
And then one day I decided, I'm just going to publish this online.
Yeah.
Just see what happens, because if somebody else, this works for me, it's easy enough that I can understand it. What if I upload it online and then maybe it's someone else is going to find useful? So I published my first article, and back then I didn't really have my own domain name, but I published it somewhere, and then I started seeing that there's now views because it was a public article, and people started visiting the article. And then eventually I bought a domain called mansarovs.com.
Remember that one?
Yep. Yeah. And then the reason why I decided to buy it is because my wife also said, you know what, maybe I can contribute some articles to it. So I'm like, why not? And eventually she got interested in wedding photography. So, and it's a whole different story about that. But anyway, as she was doing it, I figured, okay, we're just going to start publishing these articles together. And for a while she did contribute. What year was that? I think this was back in 2010, 11, something like that. Yeah, it's been a while now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's many years. But back then, as I uploaded the first article and published it, then the second and the third article, something amazing happened. And people started coming to the website, and now I have 1 comment, 2 comments, 5 comments, 10 comments from people who are saying, hey, thank you for publishing this because I've read all these books and all this material, and your article clarified things in a very simple way that I can actually understand.
Sure.
And that's when I understood, you know what, if this works for me and it works for other people, I'm just going to continue doing it. As I started publishing more and more and more articles, I realized that I'm growing a community of readers who are now interested in what I write. And I figured, you know what, this is a great thing. And eventually it led to me quitting my job and just doing this full time, which was an amazing turning point in my career.
Was it kind of scary? I mean,
it was very scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was, I remember that day I came home and I sat down with my wife and I said, honey, this is what I want to do. And she looked at me and she said, my wife has always supported me. She's a godsend. I really, really love her. And she sat down, when we sat down and I explained everything to her, she fully understood and she said, do it. You know, because if you're not going to be able to do it now, when are you going to do it? And I said, that's exactly the reason why I wanted to do it, is because if, you know, the last thing that you want in life is to regret that you could have done something.
Yeah.
But you didn't have the guts to do it. So when I talked to my wife, she was very supportive. My mom wasn't. She's like, don't do it. How can you take 20 years of your experience and just ruin it in one day? Yeah. She wasn't very supportive initially, but then because she didn't see the future. That's the thing. If,
right.
You know, for something like this, for a lot of people, photography is a hobby. Right? And she said, how can you go from IT, from a vice president to a photographer? You know, I said, Mom, how can you say this, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not degrading to be a photographer if this is what you want to do. Don't you want to be? Don't you want to see me happy? So she said, I definitely want you to see you happy, but I also don't want you to suffer.
Yeah.
So there's and mothers, they always look at that from the risk perspective, right? So they're like, you know, what if because they always want something that's best for you.
When I was going into college, I started in engineering.
That's right.
And
I remember
switched
that.
to journalism, and
I remember that conversation actually.
Yeah. Oh, it was a big one because, you know, I obviously had always liked doing photography, and that was my main interest. Right. But it's also not really how a lot of people earn an income. Or if you do earn an income, then you're doing usually weddings or something like that, which was never really what I wanted to do. And switching, you know, my parents were pretty supportive of it, especially after, you know, we had some conversations and talked about it. But every person who I talked to afterwards and told about the switch, they all said, whoa, you know, how did your parents react to that? Were they terrified? Were they worried for you? And it makes sense because they're looking out for you, and they don't want, you know, that they see the engineering path that I was on, and it was something that I enjoyed, but didn't like as much as this. And
yeah, I remember that conversation when you told me that you're switching majors, and I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? Because I was worried, you know, and at the time you were already writing articles for Photography Life, and one thing I didn't want to do is to be an outside influence that negatively influences your decisions, because, you know, it's one thing when it's really something that you truly want to do and it's your decision, right?
Yeah.
And it's a different thing if somebody tells you to do something. And I never told you to switch majors because I thought you were going to be an engineer.
Yeah, but I wanted to work for Photography Life long term, and so at that point I thought journalism would give me more skills that were actually relevant to it, and I think that it did.
Now that you mentioned, let's actually talk about how that happened, because I remember that day when you submitted the article, and I was sitting at home and I was about to write an article, and I get this form that says a new content has been submitted, and it says Spencer Cox, and back then I didn't know who you were, but on the very bottom of it, as I skimmed through it, I saw Spencer Cox, 17-year-old photographer.
Right.
And I remember thinking, oh boy, 17 years old. When I was 17 years old, I had no idea what the heck I was doing. Yeah. And this guy is sending me an article. So for me, that was already fascinating. But tell us what you wrote and...
Sure, yeah. The article was called The Versatility of Prime Lenses. And the thesis of the article was that you can have a set of lenses that are all primes, but you can cover essentially the same perspectives as a zoom lens would. Assuming that you've got, you know, like a 36 megapixel camera, you can crop a decent amount. If you need something wider, then you can make a panorama. And it's kind of a simple premise, but it is a technical article. Yeah.
So the idea here is if you take something like a 35 millimeter lens, right?
It's a 24 to 50.
And it's a 24 to 50.
You can think of it as a 24 to 50.
Because you can just do a couple of panos, and it's going to be a wider shot.
Yeah, you flip the camera vertical, you take 3 photos, you crop it, you've got a wide shot. Or if you've got, you know, a 36 megapixel camera or more or even less, you can crop about 1.5 times, and it's still quite good even for a large print.
Now, you can imagine as this article is written and submitted, and I'm reading through it, and I'm thinking, how the heck does a 17-year-old person come to all this? And I read the whole thing. I fully agreed with it. There were no technical errors. The grammar was perfect. The images were very good. And I'm thinking, boy, this is really good.
It was still very controversial, though.
I know.
Which makes sense. It's the type of thing that people, you know, they don't want to crop their photos that much. Makes sense. They don't have time to make a panorama. And then there were also people who disagreed with the technical side of things.
Right.
And so there was a huge discussion in the comments about the accuracy of it and things like that. And you ended up joining the conversation, and after that, I got an email from you, and you asked if I wanted to write more.
Yes. Well, for me, I think the biggest thing and one of the biggest reasons why I wanted more content from you was because I actually saw a video of you in front of a waterfall.
Yep.
And you were planning your trip to Iceland, and you were talking about the whole thing. And when I saw it, I saw sincerity, and I saw something. You know how sometimes you sit down with a person and the first 30 seconds of impression, right?
Sure, yeah.
And you already know whether you're going to connect with that person or not. It's something like that happened remotely for me. I was watching that video and I thought, you know what? This is great. And I really enjoyed it. Although it was very, I can't remember what you shot it with.
It wasn't
was
great.
Very loud waterfall in the back.
I can tell you one slightly insincere thing about that video. The microphone that I had to record it recorded about 5 times as loud on the waterfall as me talking.
Yes.
So I ended up filming, and I filmed like a 2 or 3 minute version where I wasn't talking at all, and I was only filming the waterfall. And then at home, I ended up dubbing over everything that I said.
Really?
And then I layered, you're not joking, I layered the waterfall sound behind it.
That's impressive.
I
very
wanted to put
impressive.
effort because I wanted it to look good, but it took probably hours of like zooming in all the way. I think it was Movie Maker, literally. Zooming in all the way on the audio track, cutting out the audio where it didn't quite match up with my lips or the way that I was talking, and then I ended up cutting the final like minute-long video.
That is very impressive.
I don't think you knew that.
I had no idea. This is the first time I'm hearing it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, and when I saw that, that's when I thought, I was looking at myself. You always, right? You always look at your own background and your own experience. And I remember graduating from University of Colorado in 2000.
Right.
That was the scariest day in my life.
Really?
I had no idea what was going to happen because I was going to go home. I had to work for the government.
You were going to
I was an exchange student, right?
Sure.
So I was here for 3 years, from 1997 to 2000, and I had to go back and I had to work for the government. And I was scared because, I'm graduating with a management degree, and then my minor was marketing.
Okay.
And I'm thinking with those two, and then having interest in information technology, which is always my side hobby, right?
Right.
What am I going to do in life?
Yeah.
And this was me when I was 21 years old. And you're 17 years old sending this complex article, right? And I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, man, this is a very interesting personality that I'd like to get to know better.
I've got to say that I mean, at the time, being 17, did not expect a website to actually ask me to write for them. So I was equally as surprised on my side, I guess, as you were on your side.
Yeah, I remember that day. I sent an email to you, and I'm thinking he's probably going to say no because he's like, I don't know. I'm comparing myself at that time of my life, and if somebody gave me an idea like that, I would probably be like, it would be either scary for me, or I would be busy doing something else.
Yeah.
So, and then you said yes. And then your second article was macro photography article.
Yeah, a gigantic tutorial to macro photography. And we've updated it like 3 or 4 times since then. But it was, at the time, the type of photography that I did was almost exclusively macro. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I always you sit down and you think about the past decisions that you made and some of the things that you've done.
Oh, it's weird.
I came across so many wonderful people through Photography Live, and I'm very thankful. And thank you all for being readers and now YouTube subscribers, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget to click that. As they say, the bell, right?
Yeah.
The notifications bell, whatever that
we're
thing is
still
called,
learning about that. But
whatever. To me, that doesn't matter.
Eventually, I think.
Eventually, maybe one day. But the thing is, I met a lot of wonderful people through Photography Live. That's one I'm very, very grateful for.
Sure.
Through workshops, through all kinds of, at some point of time, we even did classroom kind of environment where we taught.
Really? Okay.
Lola taught portrait photography because at the time she was doing weddings and engagements and all those kind of things. I was assisting her.
Nice.
And then I did some on landscape photography. So I started meeting people, and this is something that I really enjoyed is through Photography Live, having all these wonderful people that are, engineers. I've met rocket scientists.
Yeah.
I've even met a laser technician. All these crazy backgrounds, right? People with wonderful personalities that now I get a chance to go to workshops with, travel with, and sometimes we'll, they'll participate in discussions on Photography Live. But you're one of them.
Yeah.
And we might have met not through a workshop, but through Photography Live as a website, right? But I'm very grateful because now you're a big part of the team, and we're working on content basically
I'm
Just
certainly
to us.
grateful for it too. Obviously, I mean, this for the past 5 or 6 years of my life has been a very large portion of either my free time or now
Right.
my main job.
Right.
So
Yep. So for those that don't know, Spencer is now a partner. We're
yes,
working
yeah.
together, basically doing most of the stuff that we do. You'll see that the majority of the articles are published either by Spencer or myself. And we do also have a great team. And that's
Yeah.
another thing that I do want to mention. Although we're running things behind the scenes and doing a lot of these kind of things like now YouTube content, there are. I'm very thankful for all the people that helped build Photography Life.
Yeah.
And initially we had wonderful people like Tom
Oh,
Red,
especially back in the
Bob
day.
Wisniewski, Romana, so many wonderful
Yeah.
people. And they all contributed to Photography Life.
Yeah.
So over
And
the
you can't
years,
get a site off the ground without a group of people like that.
exactly. Over the years, the site has changed. We've gone from one level to another level to
Yeah.
another level, and we've had our times when, if you remember, there was this period of time when there was an explosion in photography
man.
world.
Yeah, like what, 2012, 2013,
Yeah,
roughly?
I would say 2012, 13, 14.
Okay.
Those 3 years or so.
Yeah.
That's when the entire industry was just taken.
Everyone wanted a camera.
Everybody wanted
Yeah.
a camera. Everybody was buying a camera,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yep.
just like, I don't know. It was maybe it was a combination of different things,
Yeah.
but it was a time when photography was truly exciting. And there were so many people. There were Chase Jarvis with his quote on. The best camera is the one that's with you. People are still using that quote. I don't know if he's the original author behind that quote, but it makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense, and it's interesting because there were so many new personalities at the time that people were excited about, right?
Yeah.
There was like the explosion of the lighting industry. Trying to remember the Flash guy.
Oh, David Hobby?
David Hobby. David Hobby. I
Yeah.
actually remember visiting his website where he did speed lights.
For sure.
And, he brought speed lights to the masses, right? Everybody realized that they can light up any subject
Yeah.
now with a basic speed light.
I mean, this is a time when everyone had like a basic cell phone so they could text people photos, and Facebook was getting off the ground, or had been for some number of years, and everyone wanted to send people photos, but their phone cameras couldn't really take good enough photos at that
Right.
point. So it was this perfect intersection of a lot of
Yes.
demand, and the only good cameras to do it were mostly DSLRs at that point.
Right,
So
right.
very good time for us.
Well, now it's interesting because you're looking at the industry. We went through this huge
Yeah.
increase, right? This huge surge where everybody wanted to buy a DSLR and lenses.
and learn about them.
And learn
as
about
well.
them, right. And then something incredible has been happening, kind of depressing almost,
Yeah.
right, in the last few years,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, incredible in a bad way. It went like this, and then it just started spiraling down.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we got to our lows yet,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like the industry overall is experiencing a lot of difficulties with people now are just more interested in taking pictures with their cell phones.
Yes. Yep.
Smartphones came in and just started taking that big share away from point and shoot market, which completely collapsed.
Yep.
Now we don't even. I
No,
don't know
yeah.
the last time that I ever used a
it's been
point-and-shoot
ages.
camera.
Yeah, same
It's
here.
been ages, yeah. So it's just interesting how
It's almost unfortunate because there are more people right now who want to take photos than there have ever been.
Yes.
But everyone's camera that they keep in their pocket has crossed the threshold of competent enough for
Yes.
everyone at this point. Or
Absolutely.
99% of people.
Well, and going
So-
back to what Creative Life or
Yeah.
Chase Jarvis said, right?
Sure. Best camera's
the
the
best
one you got
camera is
with
the
you.
one that you got with you. And if you've got a small camera in your pocket and it's
Yeah.
always with you,
Yeah.
and you don't have the bag with a DSLR, that's probably one of the reasons why these things are experiencing
Oh, yeah,
a
totally.
decline is because
And they're also just complicated.
right,
I
they're-
mean,
exactly.
phones have one button and it's the photo button.
Exactly.
And this
Yeah.
has, dozens.
And now we're looking at mirrorless cameras and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so many new features. Now we've got face tracking, we've got animal tracking, right? Like all these
And we love
crazy-
it. I mean,
Yeah, the techies like
I
it.
appreciate that kind of
Right?
stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, but when it comes to the end user,
Yeah.
right, the very simple consumer who
Yeah.
just wants to take a picture,
Right.
they grab a mirrorless camera and they see all these buttons, especially on these some of the cameras. They've
Yeah.
got like C1, C2, all these different buttons that make no sense whatsoever.
Yep.
Right, and then you can custom program all of that, but it takes away from being able to just simply take a
Yeah.
picture.
Yep.
And I think that is one of the reasons why we're facing all these issues in the industry today.
And ironically, the cameras that are more complicated like this, they've gotten so good that people don't really care to buy the new mirrorless or the new DSLR because their camera from 3 or 4 years ago is more than enough already. So
Exactly.
it's saturated with the number of people already who were ever willing to buy something like that.
Well, not to go too deep into this discussion, because we could talk about it for
sure.
hours. I hope this introduction was good with Spencer and I, and we just wanted to do this, right? We just wanted to talk a little bit about us so that people get to know us, and then also get to talk about cameras. But I guess we'll save that conversation for a separate video.
Yeah, we're going to try to do this a little bit more than just once.
Yes, absolutely. I think going forward, we should do a little bit more interactions just so that we could sit down and discuss maybe some of the basic things. And when you read an article, so that you're not thinking, well, who wrote this article? Now you get to know us a little bit more personally, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then we'll just do more content like this.
I hope that we will. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.